In the year 536 AD, the sun disappeared. Not at night, during the day. A volcanic eruption somewhere in Iceland sent a cloud of ash across the entire northern hemisphere so thick that the sky stayed dark for 18 months. Farmers watched their crops die in fields they couldn't see clearly at noon. A Roman politician named Cassiodorus wrote at the time that, "We marvel to see no shadows of our bodies at noon." He also wrote that the sun appeared blue. The Byzantine historian Procopius recorded that the sun gave forth its light without brightness, like the moon, during the whole year. These men weren't being dramatic. They were describing the actual sky above their heads. And it was just the beginning. Ask Michael McCormick, a medieval historian and archaeologist who chairs the Harvard University Initiative for the Science of the Human Past. Which year was the worst in human history? And his answer is immediate. Not 1349, when the Black Death was killing half of Europe. Not 1918, when the Spanish flu was killing up to 100 million people. Not any year of either world war. His answer is 536. It was the beginning of one of the worst periods to be alive, if not the worst year, he told Science magazine. And when you understand what followed, it is very difficult to argue with him. The story begins with what scientists now call the Late Antique Little Ice Age. It was triggered by that Icelandic eruption, confirmed by McCormick and glaciologist Paul Majewski through ultra-precise analysis of ice cores drilled from a Swiss glacier. Graduate student Laura Hartman found 2 microscopic particles of volcanic glass in the ice from 536. And when the team analyzed the chemistry of those particles, they could trace the eruption precisely. Summer temperatures across Europe and Asia dropped between 1.5 and 2.5 degrees Celsius. That sounds small. It was not small. It was enough to trigger the coldest decade in over 2,300 years. China reported snowfall in summer. Ireland recorded what its chronicles called a failure of bread across 3 consecutive years. The harvest simply did not come. Imagine being a farmer in Europe or the Middle East in 536. You wake up every morning to a sun that gives no warmth and no clear light. You plant your seeds because you have no other choice. You watch them fail. You watch them fail again the following year, and the year after that. There is nothing you could have done differently. There is nothing you could have understood about why. The sky simply stopped working, and nobody knew when it would start again. 2 more massive volcanic eruptions followed in 540 and 547, deepening the cold and extending the darkness across an already shattered world. And then, in 541, something arrived that turned a catastrophe into an extinction-level event for entire civilizations. Bubonic plague reached the Egyptian port of Pelusium in 541, carried by merchant ships whose cargo holds were full of grain and rats. The rats carried fleas. The fleas carried Yersinia pestis, the same bacterium responsible for the Black Death 8 centuries later. From Pelusium, it moved with devastating speed through Alexandria, up through the Mediterranean trade routes, and into Constantinople, the heart of the Byzantine Empire, by the spring of 542. At its peak, contemporary sources report that 5,000 people were dying in Constantinople every single day. Some accounts put the number at 10,000 on the worst days. Up to 300,000 people died in that city in the first year alone. The plague, which historians now call the Plague of Justinian, killed an estimated 25 to 50 million people across the Mediterranean, Europe, and the Near East. Emperor Justinian himself contracted the disease. He survived. Millions of his subjects did not. The world McCormick's ice cores describe is almost impossible to fully comprehend. A century of cold, a sky that didn't work, crops that wouldn't grow, starvation so widespread that entire regions depopulated, and then a plague that arrived precisely when the surviving population was already weakened by years of hunger and cold. The combination was catastrophic in a way that no single disaster, not war, not drought, not disease alone, could have achieved. McCormick has said the world showed no clear signs of recovery until 640 AD. That is over a century of continuous collapse. More than 4 generations of human beings who were born into the darkness and died before the sun properly returned. But here is the question that the darkness of 536 raises about the deeper story of humanity. Was 536 truly the worst? Or does the answer change when we extend the timeline further back, far enough that written records disappear entirely, and we are left with only bones and ice cores and the genetic code locked inside every living human body? 74,000 years ago, a supervolcano in what is now Indonesia erupted with a force that dwarfed anything in recorded history. The Toba eruption was, by scientific measurement, one of the largest volcanic events on Earth in the past 2.5 million years. The Toba catastrophe hypothesis proposes that the eruption triggered a global volcanic winter lasting up to 6 years, and that the environmental collapse that followed drove the human population down to fewer than 10,000 individuals alive on Earth. This hypothesis is supported by genetic evidence. Our DNA contains a bottleneck, a dramatic narrowing of genetic diversity that scientists estimate occurred somewhere between 50,000 and 100,000 years ago, consistent with the Toba timeline. To be clear, this remains a hypothesis, not confirmed fact. Recent archaeological evidence from Africa, India, and Indonesia suggests early humans may have been more resilient than the hypothesis proposes, and some researchers believe the bottleneck had other causes. But the genetic narrowing is real. Something reduced the human population to a critical edge. Whether Toba was the cause or a contributor, our ancestors survived an event that left almost no one behind. And every person alive today is descended from those few thousand survivors. So the answer to the question is layered. If you were born in 536 AD, you entered a world where the sun had already been failing for months, where the harvests had already begun to fail, and where a plague would arrive within 5 years to finish what the cold had started. McCormick and his team call it the beginning of the worst period in recorded history, and the evidence locked in the ice of a Swiss glacier confirms why. But if you extend the question to the very edge of human existence, to the moment when our species came closest to not existing at all, then 74,000 years ago, somewhere on a planet darkened by a supervolcano, a few thousand people survived something for which there is no comparison in all of recorded history. Both groups of people survived. We are here because they did. And compared to either of those moments, wherever and whenever you were born lucky.